Hi, everybody. Welcome to NewsNite for Friday, June 3rd. Great to have you along. It's been a week of judging. Judge Cosgrove gives us insight into Kelley Williams-Bolar. What impact will it have on the hearing in Columbus? Judging a police career, we'll talk with Craig Gilbride as he retires from the Akron Police Force. And also Judgment Day for Jim Tressel. Those stories and more next on NewsNite. Busy first week of June, a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Great to have along Ed Esposito this week from WAKR, and always great to welcome freelance journalist and contributor Jody Miller. You know, we joke that it is the story that will never end this week, a bombshell of sorts. Judge Patricia Cosgrove, who hasn't spoken publicly about the case very much since the sentencing, writes a letter down to the parole board and outs what many of us had heard, that Kelley Williams-Bolar nowhere near getting the teaching certificate that she has portrayed herself to be so close to getting.
Well, not really a letter to the parole board. It was a letter to the jurors who served on the Kelley Williams-Bolar jury. And she told me that she had been spending a lot of time thinking about this, because most judges will take the time to, generate a letter or handwrite a letter thanking jurors, especially in a difficult case. And while this wasn't a difficult case in terms of time commitment from the jury, it was something they clearly saw explode after their verdict and after the sentence, so she felt it was necessary to talk a little bit more about it. And I thought it was an extraordinary letter. You normally don't see a judge come out like that and talk in those terms.
No, but I think she did it not only for the jury, who had been pilloried in a lot of respects in terms of what their verdict was, but she herself had been raked over the coals a great deal about the trial and the verdict. And I think she just needed to feel that, wait a minute, there are some facts and figures here that perhaps the media, whether it's local or national, didn't pick up on, and she thought that those facts should be brought to the forefront.
She put out there that she herself had been willing to go to bat for Kelley Williams-Bolar to help her keep her teaching certificate, only later to learn.
She wrote a letter, did she not?
She did. She allowed her to get out of jail a day early. It should have been it was supposed to be a 10-day sentence. She served 9 days. She allowed her to serve public service. I mean, it was a granted, it was a first conviction, first offense, but it was something that could have attached with it a 5-year sentence and a considerable fine. She didn't do that. She didn't order her to pay the money back to Copley Fairlawn Schools. A lot of this was public. It was already public and was out there. I thought what was extraordinary was the fact, and to go to, the media didn't know what Kelley Williams-Bolar's education status was, because the University of Akron, for those of you just, following along at home, we can't just call up and say, show us so-and-so's transcript. There has to be a release to show that information. That's considered private. It's considered, part of the ownership of the student. I mean, I can't look at Stephanie Warsmith's transcript or your transcript unless you say it's okay. And Kelley Williams-Bolar never said it was okay until it came time to go down to the Ohio Parole Authority. And this is when this started to come out, and the judge obviously saw this report. And I think what occurred to her is, wow, I've been taken in again. I mean, here's yet another brick in the wall where we have this representation, and I think it was personally hurtful to the judge, because the judge made a big deal out of the fact, out of the, and we did too. I mean, I wish I could go back to the videotape to our discussions of this, talking about the impact on the teacher certification. That's something that really bothered Phil Trexler a lot on this program when we talked about it before. So there was the assumption she was just hours away and she was in a college of education. It turns out none of that applies here. So, again, I just, as a critic of those who say she should get a free pass or win clemency here, how much more do you need on the plate to take a look at this? Well,
and I agree with that. It's like there's been deception upon deception upon deception, whether it's been a lie of omission or commission. It's the public, I think, has been misled to a great extent.
Now, as I understand, and I was there the day of sentencing when she made this big case for, I'm going to succeed in my teaching career no matter what happens here, and I'm so close, and I'm going to finish college. And then it came very, very quickly to the media spread that she's not as close as she thinks she is.
But you couldn't get that confirmed.
But I understand the way the laws play out, they may not be able to release her records, but they can confirm her attendance.
Right.
She had actually signed an additional form preventing them from confirming her attendance, which in fact confirms that she was there at least for a day.
What does that tell you, though?
But nobody goes to those extremes. And I noted this in my reporting after she was on Dr. Phil. No one I've ever covered has gone to that extreme to even prevent that we can identify her dates of attendance at a university. This seemed extremely strange, as though she didn't want anybody to know anything about what she was really saying.
She was hiding it. She was hiding it. That's the bottom line to me.
So as journalists, should we be looking at people's education as opposed to taking it for granted when they present it?
Well, I think everybody took it for granted when it was presented. That's the point. I mean, her attorneys presented it as such. She presented it as such. It was presented in an argument in front of the judge and jury. I think it's natural for all of us to make an assumption that when you've been found guilty or you're arguing something in your defense, that it's not something that's going to be so easy to go back into and poke holes in it. Quite frankly, I think if the prosecutors had known that she was going to make this "I'm so close to my teaching degree" argument, they would have nailed her right on the spot, and during the trial. I think they would have done that. It just stands to reason, especially, taking a look back at this Monday morning quarterbacking is just astounding when you see the number of things that came out, and now, because of her behavior, because of the things that she's represented that have been proven now not to be true, not even, to be spun true, I think it's reasonable that we would go back and look at everything she says now and say, show me.
Well, and the job, obviously, of a journalist is to present all of the facts. But there's a degree of trust that you have to have that when you're presenting the facts, or when you are basing your story on information that you have, that at least a modicum of that information is true, and that you're not dealing with somebody who can, as Ed said, spin the facts the way they want to. How much more work and digging is a journalist supposed to do when, in fact, this kind of information is presented as fact?
My frustration always as a journalist is that those that criticize us for digging too deep sometimes, when all we're really trying to do is just validate what has been put out there. But one of the comments from this week's Beacon Journal article about the letter from Judge Cosgrove, she comments as a follow-up that she was frustrated with the local media, that the local media may have started the fire that created this national misrepresentation of what the case was all about. And I can't go back and look at every TV station, every radio report, every newspaper report on this, but not all of the local journalists were really spinning this. I mean, I have great respect for the judge, but I also take that point a little bit the wrong way.
I just, and it was specific. It wasn't just the local media. We've talked about this before. I mean, she didn't name him, but it was Ed Meyer from the Beacon Journal who covered the story. I think in Ed's defense, or even the Beacon Journal's defense, I don't think anybody had an idea that this case was going to have the kind of layers that it does. If it did, there would have been a lot of reporting resources from all of us that would have gone into it. It's not as though it was like, this is Scammer of the Year. It was an interesting case, and if you just look at it, if you look at just the top facts on the case, it doesn't look like it's going to be something that's going to blow up the way it did. Now, in retrospect, when you look at it, it's like, wow, I wish we'd have spent more time on that. But I think clearly a lot of the public perception coming out of this case was because the coverage from all of us. I do think it was shallow. We gave her the benefit of a doubt. We were reporting, prosecutor says this, Williams-Bolar says this, and then we were leaving it up to the readers, to act as the jury.
Ed Meyer's a journalist, and for all intents and purposes, he's a good journalist. But when he's the only one covering there, and I think he was taken in by what was being presented.
I don't know if he was taken in again. I think it was shallow coverage because there wasn't this is not something that merited 800-word or 1,000-word story at the time. I mean, it's the story that's lasted for 6 months now.
Yeah, I want to talk about the big impact of this as we shift the conversation now to NewsNite.net.
For more NewsNite content, including extended discussions, full interviews, and the chance to speak your mind about the issues, join us online at NewsNite.net.
Again, we invite you to watch our extended conversations on NewsNite.net. Ed will return in a moment, but great to have along now Stephanie Warsmith from the Akron Beacon Journal. And we turn our attention to law enforcement, and the city of Akron will soon be getting its new police chief. But first, we say goodbye to a career law enforcement officer, Craig Gilbride. You had a chance to sit down with him. Your entire interview is on NewsNite.net. But, Steph, what do you think his legacy is? What's his impression of him outgoing as former chief?
Well, he's had a very long career, obviously, in Akron. and he's helped the department through a difficult transition period here where they didn't have a chief and came out of retirement to help the city out. So he's had a very long and an impressive career with the department. I think he'll be missed greatly. He was involved in some major investigations in the department's history, and I think that the officers all really look up to and respect him.
Family on the department too, right?
Yes, several. I'm not sure how many.
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you
back.
Offhand, but yeah. So he leaves along that legacy as well.
Well, and Steph is absolutely right. This is a man who's been, he came up through the ranks. 33 years he spent with the Akron Police Department, and like Steph said, he took over after Mike Matulovich left, and it was an interim, and he knew it was going to be an interim because the city was going to do a nationwide search. But that was back in 2008. Retired the first time in 2009, and that was a rough year when he was chief because you had the mayoral recall. You had a number of layoffs. You had some real the Department of Justice investigations, one of which we will talk about a little bit later. So he has a reputation, I think, among the rank and file as an honest, dedicated street cop. Having come up through the ranks, he knew everybody in the department. He's a native here of Akron, and I mean, he's got everybody's respect. I think the best legacy he has is he gets along with everybody, whether it's the mayor, or whether it's Paul Holinsky, or whether it's like the interesting thing he said in the interview was the highlight of his career was when he trained a rookie, and that rookie happened to be Gus Hall, who ended up being like his best friend, and who ended up taking the place of the interim chief when Craig Gilbride retired for the first time. So he comes back. He's in the position for about 5 months, and now we have a new chief.
Yeah,
so.
I've known Craig probably 20 years, both a friend and a neighbor. But watching him from the outside, you're right. His personality seems to play very well with everybody. Very professional. Seems to love what he does. Loves being a police officer. His brother Jack, also a police officer, is the wild child of the family. Definitely more of the guy that's going to chase and create some stories. But and then he has sons now on the police department too. So a great family legacy. You talked to him about the incoming chief, Jim Nice. Jim will take over next week. Here's a little bit of what Craig Gilbride had to say about the new chief.
Yeah, I think he may have some challenges from within because he will be new. He's not coming from a police culture per se or the Akron police culture per se. So that may pose somewhat of a problem. I don't think it's anything that's certainly not surmountable by any means. I think Jim will be a good leader. Some of the pros, let's face it, he's coming with a new set of eyes. He's had various background experience with the FBI. He was in charge of their special operations, if I'm not mistaken. So he brings in a lot of experience in that area, but also that he's worked with other police departments throughout the country. And he's seen how they've operated and things that he might want to bring into the Akron Police Department that will benefit us.
Okay, so he says he's a different kind of a guy, but he thinks he's going to be effective?
He thinks he's going to be effective. He said with his FBI background that he's done a lot of special operations around the country, worked with different police departments all around the country, and that he's got some technology background, which is one of the things that, like the Perf report, recommended that is going to be policing of the future. So I think Craig felt that Jim had an awful lot to bring to the department. His exposure in other police departments around the country will allow him to bring, in fact, what he has seen from those other departments to Akron. He also acknowledged that it's not going to be an easy road because there's been some criticism within the department that we in the media have heard about, my God, this is the first time this department has gone outside to bring in somebody new. So it's going to be an interesting couple of months as he gets his feet wet, learns the department, learns the people and the personalities involved, and see how the transition goes.
A lot of pressure on the new chief.
It is. Like Jody said, it's the first time there's been a chief from outside. He does have ties to the Akron area, which I think bodes in his favor. But as we know, and we've talked about a lot on the show from, in lots of different cases, there's a very difficult relationship between the FOP and the administration. And so how will having this chief who didn't rise through the ranks like a Craig Gilbride, how will that play into that already strained relationship.
Well, one of the first things he'll have to look at is a story out in today's Akron Beacon Journal about the Jeffrey Stevens case. An FBI review finds there was not enough evidence to bring any criminal charges against the two officers. This is shooting from 2009 in which a man named Jeffrey Stevens, who lived in South Akron, was shot at night when he was outside with a gun, believing there was a gunman in his neighborhood, shot 22 times. Were you surprised, Steph, you remember this case, this got everybody going. I'm wondering what the reaction is going to be now that the FBI says that there's not enough evidence here to say these officers did anything wrong.
Right. That was the conclusion of their investigation. The Justice Department, the FBI, took a look at all of the investigation files and talked to witnesses, and their conclusion was that the officers acted properly, should not be charged with anything criminally. Now, you still do have the civil case going on. Mm-hmm. And so that still is not yet concluded. And the attorney that Phil talked to for the family said, look, this investigation by the Justice Department has no bearing on that civil case. Obviously that's still out there. So, but this was part of what Jody was talking about, a very difficult, tumultuous time in the department where you had a couple of high-profile police-involved shootings. And so far, though, all of the investigations, including this independent federal investigation, has cleared the officers and said, they did what they and
Craig Gilbride was the chief at that time.
He was the chief at that time, absolutely. And this was one of the things that we talked about. In fact, we taped the interview yesterday, and I asked him about the Department of Justice investigations and whether they were all cleared up. And in the interview, he said, well, everything but the Stevens case, which, of course, came out later in the afternoon after we had already taped. But don't forget, this was a story that just divided the community in so many respects, yes. Because this was a father who literally had gone outside to protect his family, he felt. And the officers had been called to the scene, and unfortunately it was dark, and the man had a gun, and the officers are trained to if they have to, bring down a suspect, and Mr. Stevens did not get down on the ground the way he was requested to do by the officers, and the report says that he was reaching for his gun. He's out there trying to protect his family and ends up being killed. What happened was you had members of the black community marching on City Hall, marching on the police department. Then you had members of the police department showing support for the police officers. And it was just a very difficult time. And again, it was Craig Gilbride who was the chief. And who literally just, I think, because of the calming and very, very easygoing nature of this man, was able to, he was the boss.
The new chief have to just accept all the baggage that comes with taking over this job.
Right. It's a tough job. I wouldn't want it. They didn't call me and offer it to me, but yeah, I think it's tough, and I think that there's still in the community there's people that are unhappy with how different things have been handled here, and still think that the communications between the community and the department is not what it should be. Right. That you don't have that, give and take like they would like to see going on.
I think a lot of hearts went out to these officers too, because they were called to a man with a gun, and they had to stop a threat, and they have to live with that. We hope to talk to the new chief about these and other cases going forward here on NewsNite.
On NewsNite.net, we cover a broader range of topics than we can on the air in 27 minutes. Be part of the conversation on our Facebook page and at newsnight.net.
I want to thank Jody and welcome Ed back to the panel. And the story that gained the national headlines this week was all about Ohio State. Jim Tressel, Jody had mentioned a few months ago she didn't think that he should be able to stay through all of this, and he up and leaves. Initial reaction, I never thought he'd leave. I thought they would have to dismiss him before he would walk.
He was railroaded.
He was railroaded.
I'm saying that as a Buckeye fan. You know what? He broke the rules. He didn't break the law. What amazes me is seeing comments from people saying that, that this was a crime and these are like heinous charges. He didn't break the law. He broke NCAA rules. What he's guilty of is of not reporting what he knew at the time. But my sense is it opens up a much wider debate. There was a story this week that it's just far deeper than 6 players. It's more like 28 or 29. I would wager if you go to any major college football program of that stature, you can't tell me that players for the University of Miami Hurricanes weren't trading off helmets or shoes or jerseys or stuff like that. You just can't. I don't believe that. I find that really hard to believe that the only ones who were doing this are Ohio State. But it's unmistakable Tressel broke the rules. Not only broke the rules, but broke the rule of his own contract. I think the fact that he's so highly regarded, despite this, is what played this out for so long.
Tough.
It's a very...
Your scarlet and gray is bleeding, isn't it?
I am bleeding scarlet. It's, as an Ohio State grad, and I was telling you before we started taping today that I had a tradition whenever I watched an Ohio State football game that at some point during the game I would say, Jim Tressel is a god. I don't know why. That was just like my little tradition. And
he was for 10 years.
I loved him. I mean, and the fact that he came from Youngstown, so, he was really an Ohio guy. And obviously he did great things. And I know Marlo Ridenour, one of our sports columnists, wrote that, he is going to have a positive legacy here. Look at his record against Michigan. Look at, the number of times that he got Ohio State into the national championship games. He really did a lot of great things. He made a mistake. He broke the rules, like Ed said, I realize. So, but what has bothered me, and I realize I really feel, as journalists we're supposed to be objective. I don't think I can be completely objective about this. My husband keeps telling me, if this was Michigan, you would be like, that guy needs to go. And
he should have gone to jail if he was from Michigan.
Yeah. But I just keep thinking about how Tressel's such a great coach, and he's going to end up going somewhere else, being a great coach there. And what's going to happen with Ohio State? It's a terrible time for them to lose a coach here, right heading into the preseason. Who are they going to get? How is this ultimately, going to affect the team? And so I just really think it's very sad.
You start from scratch. I mean, there have been plenty of other schools. USC, I think, sticks out in mind. Well, USC nailed.
USC just got
a year ago. So listen. They'll bounce back. It'll be a rotten time for recruiting. To be honest with you, I mean, it just depends on what the NCAA does, what comes out of this. It's definitely a rebuilding time for both. I think for Tressel, I mean, there was talk today, is Tressel done in college football? And I agree with you, I don't think he is. But, it sort of draws parallels, not at the same level of what they did. But, people said Keith Dambrot was done. After his utterances at Central Michigan, that he'd never coach again. Well, here he is back in the MAC. He's home. He's coaching. He's got a positive influence on people. He's doing something he loves. I wouldn't be surprised to see Jim Tressel wind up in the MAC again, maybe even the Big Ten. I wouldn't be surprised to see him wind up somewhere here in Ohio, because I think that's where his heart is.
With the pressures on winning in major athletics, can you really be the top integrity guy that follows the rules and win national championships under the current system? Can you be both?
One of the things that bothered me about this all along was that I felt like I didn't care that much about this thing, with these kids and the selling the rings and whatever. So, I think that perhaps they need to look at the rules here that Tressel broke and decide whether this is how it should be done. And I don't know what the answers are. I really don't. But at the same time, I look at these kids. Some of them, probably came from, really poor backgrounds, and then all of a sudden, they're faced with the possibility of being able to, sell their championship rings or whatever and make some money. And, should they be allowed to do that? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that this whole turn of events kind of begs that question.
Well, I think the rules regarding Tressel, I think, are solid. I think a coach should be required to report these things. I think the coach should have done that. I think that was clearly a lapse on his part. Regarding the players, let's be honest about this. Ohio State football tanks for a couple of years. That's going to really hurt the rest of their programs, especially their Title IX programs. Women's hockey, women's lacrosse. Those don't generate the kind of critical mass to pay for themselves. Ohio State football pays for athletics at Ohio State, for all of it, and then some. So if you hurt that, you hurt those other programs going down the the line. I think it is a good discussion to have. There's a lot of discussion now, should athletes be paid? You know, it's extraordinary when you think that schools like Ohio State go to California and Texas and Florida, you know, the big football factory states, and they recruit these high school kids, and they come out there, and you can't even legally figure out a way to get their parents to come in and watch the kid play. I mean, this is, you know, you don't have a travel fund set up to do that. I mean, this is crazy. You're making billions of dollars off the backs of these the student athletes, and a fraction of them go on to the pros. You make the argument that they're getting a college education, but come on, you're making millions and millions of dollars on this, and these guys, you know, are at the point where they got to sell their rings to get a tattoo. That's absurd.
A lot of people are saying that needs to be looked at, but you know, again, the challenge of having integrity and following the rules and still being successful. In the military, we used to say that units that pass inspections don't survive combat, and units that survive well in combat never pass an inspection. I think it's kind of the same way. When you look at this, we've got about a minute left. I just ask each of you, you know, does the media have to check itself going forward, ever putting somebody on a pedestal again, because it may cloud the way that we review what they do?
Yeah,
leaving them speechless.
I guess I can't say Jim Tressel is a god.
I say that broadly
anymore,
because all of us in the media thought he was one thing,
right.
And now it appears that he may have been looking the other way at things for years.
Who's next? Mike Krzyzewski at Duke. I mean, you know, I mean, you're talking about these winning programs and doing stuff like that. I think we do need to question these things, even at the level of Kent State, even at the level of University of Akron, even at the level of Walsh and Malone in Mount Union. It's good and right that you question these things, but should they be on a pedestal? I don't know. What was their record? Mm-hmm. You know, if you beat Michigan for 10 years and bring home a national championship, hell yeah, you ought to be on a pedestal.
She's not going to say no to that.
She knows I'm right. You should be.
Most of Ohio
I'm really going to miss him and miss his presence because I think he.
You're going to miss him next Thanksgiving against Michigan.
Yeah, exactly.
Keep that point. We're out of time. Ed, Jody, Steph, Jody, thanks for being with us. Thanks you too. See you next Friday for NewsNite.